There are many things in the world all around us that seem to defy explanation. Even the most rational and apparently sensible among us have known that feeling when something is just a little off. Maybe it's an odd urge you get when you look over your shoulder when you know for a fact that nothing is there. Maybe it's just a sudden sensation that there is something not quite right that strikes you before an unexpected or worrying situation develops. Some people put this down as like a sixth sense, an urge somewhere from our subconscious that seems to bypass our rational mind and override any sensible thoughts. Others can attribute it to things beyond our understanding. Maybe an idea from beyond our own realm that tells us when something is not right. Or, my personal favorite, it's just mirror neurons, because when you look at somebody and you see kind of their intentions, it's because maybe your mirror neurons are in effect. Or if, you're looking out across the vast savannah and you don't technically see a pair of eyes looking at you, but your peripheral vision does, it's also going to alert your subconscious that, hey, you're being watched. But many would refer to it as almost an animal instinct. There are many who swear by it, who say they would never ignore this gut feeling, and you shouldn't ignore your gut feeling either. However, sometimes, even animals' instincts can get things far, far wrong. What if we were to tell you that there is a bridge in an otherwise perfectly normal town that has allegedly seen multiple hundreds of dogs jumping off of it for no apparent reason? With a light content warning, because, this may be a distressing tale for any animal lovers, we're headed over to Bonnie, Scotland to learn about this so-called dog sewer slide bridge, and I would definitely say what it actually is, but YouTube would nuke this monetization from orbit. So, to get it out of the way at the start, there will be no graphic descriptions of injuries suffered by any dogs or overly detailed accounts from ones that have lost their lives. However, if even the idea of multiple dogs jumping off a bridge is something that you aren't really comfortable hearing, maybe give this one a miss. But there are plenty of other videos on this channel to choose from, so just check them out below. Scotland is the self-proclaimed, best wee country in the world. It is famous for many different reasons. Maybe it's the tartan or kilts or bagpipes. Somebody's gonna be like, that's not how you pronounce any of those, The plucky national football team or its fervent supporters that show up to every game with a smile on their face and a beer in their hands, whether it's a loss, a draw, or maybe another loss. Far away from Edinburgh Castle, the Wallace Monument, and a certain monster that may or may not inhabit the murky waters of Loch Ness, there is a town called Dumbarton that is home to around 20,000 people. Located just over 20 miles from Glasgow, which is Scotland's most populous city, Dumbarton is famous for its castle, its views, and it's infamous for the Overtoun Bridge. Overtoun House, the residence that the bridge leads to, was the work of James White, a local industrialist who decided to use some of his fortune to build himself a residence to east of Dumbarton. Work began around 1860 and the final stone went into place in 1863. Beside the house is a fairly steep ravine and gorge, with the Overtoun burn running through the bottom, around 15 meters or 50 feet from the top. A burn, for those who are unaware, is a Scottish term for a small river or stream. It would be James's son, John Campbell White, who would commission the bridge that spanned across the gap and seemed to lead straight into the entrance of his family home. The bridge itself is kind of a Gothic triple arch design, constructed of finely dressed stones, and since we are discussing it in present day, it is still standing and in good repair, you can go walk across it, although you might be trespassing. Its construction was completed by John White, and the first Lord Overtoun lived across the bridge in the house that bore his name alongside his wife until his untimely death only 13 years later in 1908. Once she too passed away in the 1930s, Overtoun House was passed on to another member of the family briefly, but they gave it over to the people of Dumbarton as a gift to do with what they saw fit. And since then, it has served a number of different purposes within the community. It was a hospital at one point, as well as serving as a base for a number of Christian centers and outreaches, and, of course, a residence. A portion of it was converted into a tea room, offering refreshments to many tourists and visitors that came to take in the sights and see the bridge. Because after the house's fairly uneventful lifespan, it was the bridge leading to it that would begin to attract a lot of attention, and it all seemed to begin sometime around the 1950s. Sometime in the decade and continuing into the 1960s, locals began to report a strange occurrence that seemed to occur around the Overtoun Bridge itself. There seemed to be an odd number of accidents happening to local dogs around this very specific landmark. So many, in fact, that it got tongues wagging and people wondering if there was something else going on. After all, just how many dogs leaping off of a bridge does it take before it becomes something to note? There are a few accurate records surviving from that time, but all that we can really know for sure is that enough dogs were getting injured or worse from jumping off of the bridge that it eventually acquired a name that would allow it to, in the modern day, be called the dog sewer slide bridge. And again, I would call it what it actually is, but as soon as YouTube's algorithm figures out, like when it automatically transcribes a video for subtitles, essentially it will see that word, it'll put a note on it like, oh, do you need help? And then it'll just demonetize it. So not really trying to do that. Anyhow, numerous individuals, both locals and visitors, reported their pets behaving very strangely when they reached the bridge. Many stopped, stock still, and stared at something unseen in the middle of the road. Some bristled, standing alert and fearful despite the fact that there was nothing there that any owner could really see. Others would begin to strain at their leads or harnesses, trying to escape forward onto the bridge, and if they weren't restrained, some jumped up onto the side of the bridge and either leapt out into the air or tumbled further down. Despite the drop, many of them survived the fall with minor injuries. Some were not so lucky. There were even reports of dogs charging off of the bridge, landing in the water or on the ground below, and being relatively unhurt by some miracle, only to get back up to the bridge and do the exact same thing over again. As more accounts came to light over the years, it began to create a bit of a stir in the community and beyond. The main question on everyone's mind was identical. What was causing these dogs to behave in this manner? The reality is that even in the modern world, bridges have long had a reputation as places where tragedies occurred. Putting aside accidents and crashes as well as collapses or other catastrophes, there is something about a structure like a bridge that lends itself well to those who are feeling especially desperate. For as long as we have had bridges, we have had those who have jumped from them in their lowest moments and the depths of their despair, and every one of them a tragedy in its own right. However, it should be obvious that dogs and animals in general lack the foresight, the planning, and the tendency towards depression or psychosis to view a bridge in the same way that people might. That is to say, animals are not capable of deliberately or knowingly taking their own lives. That's why we're just a bunch of hyper-intelligent, anxiety-ridden primates. It's very strange. But so while there is no doubting that something odd was going on at Overtoun Bridge, it should be obvious that these dogs were not knowingly or willingly throwing themselves over the edge. But as the years went on, it seemed to just keep happening. A local resident, Lottie McKinnon, had the following to say about her dog Bonnie when she sat down with a reporter from the New York Times when they were covering this story. She was quoted as saying, "Something overcame Bonnie as soon as we approached the bridge. At first she froze, but then she became possessed by a strange energy and ran and jumped right off the parapet." Lottie thought for sure that her dog was done, but luckily Bonnie survived her brush with death. The Overtoun Bridge gradually gathered such a reputation that it became the subject of a book called The Baron of Rainbow Bridge, written by local resident Paul Owens, where he seems to suggest a paranormal cause for the entire affair. It also featured in a documentary by an animal behavior expert by the name of David Sands, who we'll discuss shortly, and even actually had a short film. In terms of the pure death toll, most agree that somewhere like in the region of around 50 dogs have lost their lives by jumping off of this bridge. Obviously, that's a little alarming. Some reports, mainly the more salacious newspapers in the UK, but they put the number of dogs that have jumped over the years above 600. Most of the locals seem to believe that the true figure of those who have made the leap does number somewhere in the low hundreds. Part of the problem that has faced any trying to understand this phenomenon is the fact that no one seems to have kept comprehensive or thorough records, because why would you want to keep those records? So after all, the subject in itself, it's just fairly disturbing. What's telling is no one is denying that it happens at all. Even the most skeptical of residents and observers acknowledge that, if nothing else, a strange number of animals seem to have chosen to jump off this very specific place. In 1994, the bridge would claim its first known human life under the most tragic of circumstances. A man by the name of Kevin Moy was suffering from extreme mental health issues, which led him to believe that his own child was either possessed or the reincarnation of the Antichrist. Later diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, Kevin took out his son, only like a few weeks old, and then threw him off the bridge. Obviously, they did not survive. Reports differ on whether Kevin himself jumped off the bridge or if he was stopped from jumping by his wife, but he was arrested by police shortly after and attempted to take his own life again in custody. He was deemed medically unfit to stand trial and was remanded to a mental health institution indefinitely. He would admit that the reputation the bridge had gathered over the years may have influenced where he chose to commit this heinous act, although it wasn't the driving force behind what he did. So now we have a fair idea of exactly what sort of tragedies have happened here, but what are some of the theories that people have come up with? Because if anything, people love coming up with theories. What could it be that is causing all of these incidents in the otherwise fairly quiet part of the world. One of the most common suggestions is that the bridge itself is haunted or cursed in some way, and while it may sound a little far-fetched to some of the locals point back to the history of Overtoun House and its residents to explain why there may be something still lurking around the area with unfinished business of some sort. So let's hear the story of the specter that has become known as the White Lady of Overtoun. When we spoke about the bridge being built by John Campbell White earlier and his death in 1908, his wife was mentioned, a woman by the name of Grace Eliza McClure. She lived in the house until the 1930s, surviving multiple decades without her husband by her side. It is said that she spent these nearly 30 years mainly wandering the house, the bridge, and the grounds in sadness and mourning. Those that believe the tale think that her despair and her grief live on through her ghostly figure that have been spotted by many in various parts of the house itself, as well as standing on or crossing the bridge at some points, looking forlornly over the edge. Is it possible that the ghost of the White Lady of Overtoun is what's driving the dogs to go crazy and inducing them to jump over the edge? More members of the local community appear to believe in ghosts and spirits than they would elsewhere. There is talk of the area around the gorge and bridge holding some sort of pagan significance, harkening back to the time of the Celts. That this precise point is a location where our world and another meet, a place that is more susceptible than most to strange occurrences. A totally separate but very wild theory suggested that the resonance of the area was causing these strange behaviors, that something about the physical construction of the bridge and its interaction with the gorge below was either amplifying or creating some subsonic sounds that were interfering with the dogs, driving them insane. More plausible suggestions seem to involve the smell of wildlife or prey around the area. Is it possible that this scent of a wild animal located in the exact place is enough to send an otherwise friendly and sensible pet off the bridge towards their possible doom? It did tend to be dogs with long noses, almost exclusively in fact, which tends to lend itself to the idea that it would be something smell related. Also, it is worth noting that dogs all jump from roughly the same place and the same side. Bob Hill, the current resident of Overtoun House, for his part, puts it down to the scent of local wildlife. He was quoted as saying the dogs catch a scent of mink, pine martens, or some other mammal, and then they will jump up on the wall of the bridge, and because it's tapered, they will just topple over. However, at least one local seems to vehemently disagree, and it is a man who ought to know, one who has lived in the area for half a century and is an experienced hunter or gamekeeper. Despite the mysterious scent animal being attributed to either a mink or a stoat, he was certain that there were none in the immediate area, and certainly not in volumes enough to explain the tendencies of dogs to just take themselves out. A good question raised is why, if there was indeed the cause, then, why would these events be limited to specifically this bridge in this location? There are a great number of bridges throughout Scotland, and far more that are situated near areas that have much greater numbers of known wildlife. Many near stoats, pine martens, or minks, all animals whose scent have been accused of being the cause. Why are there not tens, if not hundreds of bridges with similar reputations and mysteries around them if the answer is something as simple as the scent of a wild animal getting in the nose of a dog? One of the more plausible explanations lies in a number of factors working together. The first is the way that people enter the bridge. Without a noticeable step up or down, it is entirely possible that the dog would not even realize that it was above ground level. They would have no indication that anything untoward is happening and that anything has changed from where they were just on flat land a few steps earlier. This could create some form of optical illusion that makes it appear as though there isn't a massive drop under the bridge and that there actually is in reality, and it could honestly very much so hurt them. That is to say that the dogs do not realize that they are in fact jumping into thin air, feeling more likely that they are simply hopping over a low wall onto solid ground. The tree branches and the various greenery below the bridge can make it appear as though the floor of the ravine or gorge is not as far down as it actually is. When you combine these elements, it leads, that it would seem, to disaster. Indeed, this is one of the conclusions that the documentary of the phenomenon created by David Sands, the animal behaviorist, drew. He steered away from any suggestion that the animals were just jumping off with the intent of injuring or taking themselves out, and instead he suggested that the ever-present theory of wildlife sense and the possible optical illusion created by the physical construction of the bridge were the possible root causes. But when it comes to the so-called dog sewer slide bridge, it is sensible to start by questioning the number of stories. There is no denying that there have been occurrences over the years, but is it just the case of people paying more attention because it has a reputation? The fact remains that when someone tries to pin down hard facts about numbers and occurrences, not personal stories or local chatter, there are no records in any official format of dogs jumping off the bridge until 1995. Again, not to say that it hasn't happened, but at the very least it seems a little off given how prevalent it appears to be and how long it's supposed to be going for. Certainly a far cry from multiple hundreds of cases that the newspapers have reported over the decades. Bob Hill, quoted earlier, who runs Overtoun House and presides over the Christian mission there with his wife, reported that they have heard of 3 dogs jumping off the bridge, and they have been there for more than 10 years. Similarly, the local vet treated a total of 4 that had jumped over in a similar period. So that brings us to 6 officially documented cases in total, given that one of the dogs treated by the vet was also one that Bob had witnessed jumping in over a decade. But equally, it is a fair point that it would be entirely normal to not report a dog jumping off a bridge in any capacity that would require or leave a paper trail. Unless there was like a need for medical intervention or indeed a burial of some sort, it isn't the sort of incident or occurrence that's really going to require a police report or a call to the local newspaper. Regardless of how common or prevalent the problem really is, you gotta ask yourself, what is the most likely explanation for it? Some might choose to believe that the White Lady truly does still wander the ancient stones, carrying out her lifelong habits just after her death. Her sadness and despair are so strong in life that it still sticks around even to this day. Why this would lead to dogs jumping off the bridge, though, has never really been established. I mean, how do you even quantify that, to be honest with you? Like, oh yeah, no, those two are related. I base this opinion on absolutely nothing. So while the investigation by David Sands and a second by Scottish Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals were inconclusive, they may have suggested some possibilities that seem at least sensible at first pass. If there were strong smells of wildlife in the area, regardless of what local hunters believe, there is every chance that it could be especially strong under particular weather conditions wafting up from the gorge below. Combine this with the optical illusion that at least some dogs have, like height-wise, this leaves you with nothing at all to indicate how high up you actually are, and it is possible that dog breeds that are genetically predisposed to go after prey might find themselves jumping up on the walls of the bridge, eagerly sniffing the air. And by a combination of bad luck, lack of warning, and the physical slope of the bridge walls, they find themselves falling through the air. It might not be a solid case, but at least it exists within the realms of believability. But where does this leave the Overtoun Bridge? And would you really want to visit it just in case there was some truth to the rumor? Keep your dog on a leash. People find the area around the bridge a good really location to like walk their dogs. It's nice. So even when people acknowledge that something strange there is going on, there hasn't been any decrease in the popularity of it. Is there a case to be made for reckless exaggeration, or is it a perfect storm of uniquely specific local conditions? Either way, if you want to ever go and visit the Overtoun House, it might be worth keeping one eye out for the White Lady, and go ahead and keep a tight leash on your dog. Just don't let it wander off or jump up onto, the walls. But yeah, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be fantastic of you. I mean, you would be an absolute baller because it helps get the video out there. And subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. We recently passed 200,000 subscribers on this channel, which is absolutely wild. I do appreciate y'all's support. And it's getting kind of interesting because people are actually finding the channel like completely independent of my main channel, which is pretty cool. But I want to thank my patrons real quick, as I always do. At the literal Wendigo tier, we have Grayson West, Stupid Fox, and Trash Panda in a trench coat. Thank you guys, I really do appreciate your support. At the Eyewitness to the Event tier, we have Beaver Malaga, Wet Skeleton. Then at the first-hand accounts, we have Cody Cherry Drake, Yeeps, and at second-hand accounts, we have Kanan Johnson, Fred Rush, Troy. And to the rest of my patrons, I appreciate you guys as well. Your help goes a long way towards keeping this channel running and is greatly appreciated. All right, so that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.